Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Nobile. I'm with Aaron, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing at Aaron now that we have depleted our available pool of IPv4 address space. This happened in September of 2015, so we are no longer issuing IPv4 address space to requesters on a general basis. So, current trends, observations. People are still desperately seeking IPv4. The need is still great. We see this every day. We get questions and calls, and we still get requests. Although v4 requests have dropped a bit, we're still seeing activity there. Most of the activity is based in the transfers and in a transfer market right now. And we have some increased activity on our waiting list. That is, people who come in to request IPv4, they don't realize we don't have it any longer. They have an option to be put on this waiting list and hope that some space will come back at some point in time. We also are seeing a lot of pre-approvals being requested, and that is in preparation to do a market-based transfer. People are coming in, getting pre-approved under policy for a particular block size, and then that allows them to go into the market and find that block size and already be pre-approved and ready to conduct the transfer very quickly once they find their space. And also our transfer listing service has seen some increased activity. That's people who need space and people who buy space can list themselves, and then facilitators can sort of help them with their transactions, and those are typically the IPv4 market brokers. These people that I just talked about are basically using space, looking for IPv4 address space to use in their networks. They're still growing their business with v4. Whereas this next category, these people who are hijacking are actually looking for space to sell. They're trying to make money off of it. So we have seen an increase in hijackings at the registry and in attempted hijackings. And much of the activity is involving the legacy space, and that's a space that's pretty much dormant. Much of it hasn't been updated in years, since the 90s even. So that's what the hijackers typically target. I have some other slides on hijackings, but just for some numbers, for some comparison. We've had about 25 hijackings reported or discovered by staff since September, and that's when we depleted our free pool. And this was both successful hijackings, they actually took place, took over the record, and attempted hijackings where staff was able to intervene. And in contrast, the previous 10 years, we only had about 50 verifiable hijackings in that 10-year period. So we're definitely seeing an increase. We expect that to continue, so we're always on our alert. You know, we know the red flags, and we're well prepared for it, but it still can happen. The other thing that we're finding now, after the fact, is there were some fraud rings, basically people who set up shell companies in order to hoard IPv4 address space, and for spamming, for selling, even for using in their networks, some of them. But this was done just prior to depletion, and we found a lot of them at that time, and we were really careful about not allowing people to hoard address space, but some of them did get by us, and this particular fraud ring that I'm thinking about set up 30 different shell companies and got space under each one of them, and they were good. I mean, they got by us. So what kind of behavior are we seeing directly related to hijackings? Just to clarify, hijacking from an Aaron perspective is unauthorized changes that are made to the database records in order to gain control of IP resources. So it's someone pretending to be that registrant in order to control that record. So what they do typically is they find the dormant registration records, and who is typically the legacy, the ones that haven't been updated in years. They check for routing to see if it's routed or not. And then they'll go further and they'll re-register expired domain names. We see that quite often. They also re-register defunct business names. And then they go through a series of registration record modifications at the registry with Aaron, pretending to be the original registrant. And that typically starts with what we call an org recovery. They try to take over the organization record so that they can make some other incremental changes. And ultimately, their goal seems to be to sell the IP addresses and transfer them to another organization, now that the market is so ripe. The other thing we hear about that we don't have a lot to do with, but people report this to us quite often, is there's a lot of route hijackings. And we've heard this from law enforcement agencies and from other external sources that tell us this is very common. And the hijackers are bringing forged LOAs, letters of authority, to ISPs to get them to route the space. So this looks at hijacking targets, specifically ARIN-issued networks versus legacy networks, and even more specific, we're looking at those networks that have validated points of contact. So a validated point of contact has either responded to ARIN's annual point of contact validation email or updated their own point of contact record, which updates the last updated date and who is. The annual POC validation is a policy. Every registered user in ARIN's database gets a mail and gets asked to update their record. They either click on a link or they say correct, and then ARIN staff will update their record. And if they don't do that within 60 days, they get marked publicly as not valid in the WHOIS database. So hijackers are looking for that. They love that kind of stuff. On the left, you can see out of the 27,000 ARIN-issued networks, about 91% of them have at least one validated point of contact, and only 9% don't. When you look on the right at the legacy networks, there's 30,500. 54% of the legacy networks have at least one validated point of contact, which is actually a fairly decent number. I was surprised at that. But 46% of them have no validated point of contact at all. And that's sort of that blue, darker blue space is the target. That's what hijackers are looking for. And when we went and looked at how many actual /24s are contained within that 46%, we came up with almost 346,000 /24s. So it's a lot of money in today's market, and it's definitely attractive to hijackers. So we do get asked, what can we do to protect our WHOIS data? And obviously, if you have a registration record in ARIN's WHOIS, the best thing to do is come in, update it, make sure it's accurate, periodically look at it, do something to update that last updated date, because hijackers don't look, when you've updated something, they're not interested. Another way is to respond to the annual POC validation message. And as I said, you either click correct, or you click on a link and say, okay, this is good, or you say correct, and ARIN staff will do it for you. Or you just go in through your ARIN Online account and you update your record. And that's the policy right there. So, as far as request activity, as I mentioned, IPv4 free pool tickets have decreased quite drastically. And most of the increase is around the pre-approvals and those specified recipient transfers, those market-based transfers within the region. We're also seeing more activity in this change of authority requests. Again, that would be merger and acquisition transfers, the market-based specified recipient transfers, and those org recoveries. And typically, those are all done in incremental steps, because a lot of times it's legacy organizations who haven't updated their records in years. So they first have to make sure that the organization, they have control over the organization. Then they actually have to do an M&A if there has been merger activity, and make sure the registration record gets into the correct organization name, and then they can do their specified recipient transfer. As far as V6 requests go, not a lot happening there. We have some steady ticket traffic. We would have expected more of an increase with V4 depletion, but it's really just not happening at this point, although I'm sure it will. So V4 requests, not a lot to see. We depleted in September of 2015, and it's been steadily going down since then. We're getting less than 150 requests per month. The waiting list has grown because there's no other option. So a lot of those people who are requesting ask to be added to the waiting list. Many of them don't. They just go away and they go into the transfer market and try to find space elsewhere. But some of them are opting to wait just in case space will come back. There are three kinds of transfers. I've been throwing out various names and transfers stuff, but I didn't tell you what they actually were. So M&A is the traditional transfer. It's based on a change in business structure. It includes company reorganizations, and it is supported by legal documentation. Staff will ask for legal docs before we can actually make that transaction happen in the database. Transfers to specified recipients are those IPv4 market transfers. They're based on financial transactions between two parties. They are supported by justified need. You must meet an ARIN policy in order to transact that transfer. And that happens within the region. And then there's a similar policy called inter-RIR transfers to specified recipients. And those are the same type of market transfers based on financial transactions, and they occur outside of the region. So they can go from ARIN to one of the registries that has inter-RIR transfer policies, and right now that's RIPE or APNIC. So this is where all the activity is. As I said, this is where all those old IPv4 requests used to be getting. They've all come to us in the form of 8.3 transfers. Last year in May, we completed, what does that say, a little under 10, maybe 9. And in April, we completed 92 of them. So it's definitely growing, and it will continue to. And this looks at the total completions. We thought this was interesting. The policy was enacted in 2011, and we only had about 20 completed transfers in 2011. 2015, we had over 200, and just in the first 4 months of this year, we've completed over 250. So we expect that trend to keep going up and up. V6 requests, as I said, not a lot happening. It's pretty steady. We had a little blip in September when we ran out of our IPv4 free pool. We had some people coming in, showing interest, and then it just leveled off again. This looks at the ISP members who have come into ARIN to get their IPv6 allocations. Right now, at the end of Q1, we had about 50% of all ISP members who have come in and gotten their allocations. When we first started tracking this back in 2010, only about 20% of our ISP members had gotten their V6 allocations. So there is some progress being made, slowly. And then this looks at those same ISPs based on their size. So we go from extra, extra small on the left to extra, extra large on the right. And what we see is that the big guys, the larger you are, the more likely it is that you've come in to get your IPv6 allocation from ARIN and are working on transitioning. And the smaller you are, the less likely you are, because only about 20% of the really small guys have gotten their V6 allocations. So that is all I have. Are there any questions? I'll go to the back mic, I guess, because you were there first.
Hello, Chris Spears, Ornet. On the hijacking, first, great information, thank you. On the hijacking front, I actually have a customer base that has mostly legacy users, that's something that I look at regularly with that report, and it's really easy to parse that data and compare it to your own routing tables. But the problem is, it's not folks in this room that have that space. It might not even be your direct customers. So it's how do we get those folks to update their data? Because even when I can, and I have a closer relationship with my customer base, the recidivism rate is really high, because 2 years from now, it'll be unvalidated, and it's only one person at that organization. So is there any way that we can really deal with this problem?
It's a good question, and we've been thinking about it ourselves, but we have to try to get the word out. I mean, obviously, we have to be doing more work in this area. If you have any suggestions yourself, I'd love to hear them. I think a lot of the legacy space holders are sort of in the academic realm, and I think maybe if we start reaching out to them, that might help. Maybe go to some of their conferences and talk about this. We haven't talked about it a lot. I did a hijacking presentation probably 12 years ago. It's the last time. So I think it's worth continuing.
Yeah, if you can have someone talk to people at EDUCAUSE or some of those groups,
right.
Those are great places, anyone that's involved with .edu.
Right, yep. I think that's a good idea. Thank you. Matt?
Thank you, Leslie. Matt Petak, Yahoo. Could you clarify one point for me, speaking of hijacking? You mentioned that your stats are including unsuccessful and successful hijackings. So if you know it's a successful hijack, i.e. you know that's not the right person, does ARIN allow those to go through? Or?
Well, they've already gone through. That's the problem. But what we do is we actually reclaim space when we know there's an actual hijacking. We lock records so that no further, they can't make any further updates to the record. Even in attempted ones, we'll lock all records until we're done doing our full research. But yes, we do reclamations of space that's been hijacked.
So they ultimately would be unsuccessful long-term. They're just short-term successful?
Probably.
Okay. I just making it sounded a little bit like you got away with it. Oh, okay. Well,
I know,
just let
no,
you
no,
have
we
it.
don't let that go, absolutely not.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Tony?
Tony Tauber, Comcast. Thanks for the presentation. A couple of things come to mind. You know, with the expiration of who is data, or you mark it, what, no longer valid? I mean, it's
Not
still
valid.
published,
I think it's
right?
called not valid.
So it would be
Yeah.
good to see maybe a similar approach taken with IRR data. Obviously, you guys have your own IRR, other IRRs exist, many complaints over time of stale data. So I think expiry would be a good thing.
So you're saying in the IRR?
Yeah.
That's an interesting point. You
Okay,
could-
and the route registry also.
Yeah.
So, and I guess any associated records, so if like the who is record that registered in the first place, just obviously wipe all those out, you know. So that's one piece of, that's one idea. And then another is with the LOAs, yeah, the forgery thing. I mean, there's no standard for what comprises an LOA. I mean, that's all just like a nasty mess. And I guess probably you guys have the same thing. I mean, you request legal documents from people. I don't know, how do you verify those?
We do independent research and we try to
Okay.
get external verification of all
Yeah, I was going to say they
documents.
should be published, right?
Yeah,
In some
yeah.
registry.
Yes,
you know,
mostly, yes.
Registry of deeds.
We
or
have
whatever
lots
it
of
is,
things
yeah.
we do, actually.
No, that's good. So, but the LOA thing, I mean, I think we probably, it you know, may well affect everybody here. I mean, all service providers, like somebody comes to you with a PDF. I mean, you have no idea what.
Right, exactly.
You know, how good that is. So I think we got to do something better in that world. And I'd like to, anybody who's got some ideas or interest, come and talk to me.
Great, thanks, Tony.
Mark Oster's Aaron. So one of the things I've actually heard from a couple of people now is we like to have some standards based on these LOAs. So, and it's really, this is a community-based sort of thing that needs to be built up. And it reminds me, I used to work for VeriSign many years ago. And one of the things that they had there is there's a race to the bottom for CAs and validating certs. And all the CAs realized that. So one of the things that they did is they came up with a consortium with a way of standardizing extended validation, where you actually had this process you had to follow through. And everybody who was a part of that consortium followed that process. They signed a document saying, here are the steps that we need to take. And the way that they do those steps is very similar in how Aaron does its vetting and many organizations when they vet those LOAs. So we just need, I think there needs to be a point where people start, okay, let's write this down, and let's all agree to it.
Can I go to the right mic with Sandy?
Sandy Murphy, oh golly. Sandy Murphy Parsons. I had a boatload of questions. I'll yield to someone else if I've gotten too far. Your discussion about the fraud ring, setting up shell corporations to get lots of address space, you said they were hoarding it. Are you suggesting that they had a need themselves and so they did all this, or that they were getting together a pot that they intended to sell?
We've seen both. We've heard and seen both. Yeah.
So if someone has gotten address space fraudulently, you reclaim it.
We will.
Have you seen it routing? What do you do about space that is
We
in
don't, we
use?
can't do anything about that. That's Aaron's, you know, our area of responsibility is the database. And that's why I clarified what hijacking is from an Aaron perspective. The only thing we can do anything about is when it's done in our database or in violation of our contract. So route hijackings, we unfortunately don't get involved in. We know a little bit about them, but we can't do anything.
Okay. The chart that you had, 26,000 members and 30-some thousand legacy, those are all org IDs?
Those were networks. When I showed the two donuts, those are networks, actual network
Okay.
registration records, yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's interesting. LOAs, obvious answer, RPKI, you get to sign it,
Okay,
right?
thank you. Can I go to the left again?
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Leslie. This is John Kristoff from DePaul University. I had maybe a couple questions and a comment. the entries in your database at risk if it's information that you were able to make public, or at least to some group for monitoring. I know some people who I met this week at the hackathon who might be interested in route monitoring, who may be able to help with some of that stuff. And two, I'd be interested to know, but I think you just answered the question, the hijacks that you discovered are simply based on database changes, is that correct?
Yes,
okay.
correct.
I'm also a part of a group called REN-ISAC, which is kind of a sister group to EDUCAUSE. If it's okay with you, I assume that it is, I can take this issue to that group. It's a security umbrella group for higher ed, and that'd probably be a good place. They'd be very interested in this sort of thing.
Fantastic. That would be great. Thank you. Michael?
I'll go. Mike Sinatra, YesNet. I want to talk about the graph where there was the bars. Yeah, that one. Because, and I should know this because I think I worked on this, but wasn't it the case that if you were an ISP, your minimum allocation in IPv6 was /32, which automatically made you either small or medium at that point. So you couldn't actually be extra small or extra small and have IPv6 at all back then until recently, right?
Right. XX small is having less than a /22 of v4 or less than a /40 of v6. And you're right, ISPs don't get /40s, so.
Right.
Right.
And it might be starting to trend upward because they have made micro allocations available for
Right.
IPv6 now.
Right, you're right.
That could
That's
be part of the reason you're seeing that skew.
good point. Thank you. Joe?
Joe Provo, Google. Thanks for all the numbers. I didn't mean it that way, but yeah. In terms of the reclaimed space, I know you've been marking entries in the database when they're going to expire and so on and so forth. Is there a feed currently or one that could be published for those revocations so that perhaps people that may care about monitoring whether or not they're in the routing system could do so automatically?
We don't do that currently. If you would like to fill out a suggestion, that's our process for getting community input, the customer suggestion process. I would advise you to do that, and then we can look at it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Leslie? Actually, we do have a daily assigned and removed report.
Right.
That shows you
RSS feed.
things that, it's in an RSS feed as well as email.
Right.
That you can actually subscribe to the list if you want to.
That's true.
So you can actually see what we assigned for V4 and V6, mostly V6 nowadays. And for those poor, unfortunate souls that somehow forgot that they had to pay for their V4 and got reclaimed, you can see those. You can see that in a list of what we've added and what's been removed from the database.
Right, but it's, I don't want to.
You have to search.
Yeah, it's not clear. It's for all removals.
Right.
Like it's not an administrative action
Correct.
removal being called out.
That is
right?
correct, Joe. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking might be more useful to JTK's comment about
Yeah.
monitoring.
Yeah, that's good. Middle mic? Thanks, Joe.
Hi, Brian Fields. I have a question about the space that you had revoked. For lack of a better term, do you name and shame the people behind that?
We do not.
Okay. And I did have one other thing. I know for LOAs, RPKI was suggested. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the main issues with that is for the legacy holders that have refused to sign a legacy RSA. Aaron has said we will not do RPKI. And as somebody that's somewhat related to somebody that has a legacy /8 who's refused to sign that, it is a bit of an issue.
That's a deterrent, right? RPKI is a service for members, so
Yeah.
yes.
Well, that being said, we do monitor our stuff, so and we see probably since the beginning of the year several hundred fraudulent announcements on the internet
Yep.
in general.
Yep. Okay. All right. Thank you for your attention.